Over 10 years of working with our hens and our composting system, it feels like we've learned some interesting and subtle nuances to facilitating really good quality compost and also tons and tons of red wigglers, which we've spoken about in the past. In this video, I want to share some things we've been doing recently that really help cache nutrients and food for our hens for later, promote the life of the red wiggler, and create beautiful compost. So let me get into it. I want to start by showing an area in the back where we've got some compost that's getting a little bit closer to getting ready to leave. It's a nearly finished compost. I want to talk about a very, very low-tech way of sifting that compost and caching the more bulky material to make even more habitat for worms and sprouts. Right now I'm standing on some compost that by no means is absolutely finished, aged, cured compost, but it's getting there. And as we've shown in many, many videos, we use our hay fork to take that material and pile it up. The hens then kick it apart. If it's a little earlier in the pipeline, the flow system for the compost, we'll add whole seed to it so that they can get sprouts out of it. But now we're getting a little closer to wanting to wrap up and get this ready to go. So as I pile it up and bounce it, I'm using the hay fork to very simply rake off the biggest chunks. Right now it's mainly corn cobs because it's midsummer and there's lots of sweet corn around. And this is one of the things I was just thinking about the other day sharing. I've mentioned these before and you can see little fruit flies around. It is what it is. It's a composting scene. Scraps of 2x4 welded wire fencing have been phenomenally useful as a way to very loosely, simply sift the coarsest materials, get them out of our way so that the texture of the compost is getting finer and finer. This needs a little bit more time, but this is close to being a really ready material to leave as a rich mulch. You can see how simple this is. I'm piling it up for them. They're kicking it apart and I'm able to really pick off the biggest pieces. If it falls through the tines, I'm not really worried about getting it out. By caching it here, we're adding extra nutrient in this ring that will continue to break down. It's a compost ring. There's worms that are randomly in there, and so that'll continue to grow. The hens can't get at this, so this is where pill bugs and worms have a backup plan for themselves. They're able to build their populations up again. I'll leave this for a few months. Once it's full, I'll throw some seed on there. In our case, we're going to use soft winter wheat because that's what we have in abundance. Here's an example of a ring. Same idea. The last time we were sifting and organizing, I filled this most of the way up. It settled immensely, and I threw seed on top. And now we've got this amazing moment where we can just simply pull the ring and leave it. We can just leave it like that. I can pick out the coarsest stuff and we can either leave it or I can pick it open just a little bit. And you see how much soil life is in there. Tons and tons of pill bugs, tons of worms. If we don't want the hens to access these, we can just simply put some sticks on top or some bricks, some bones. But what we tend to do is actually sift the bones out into their own area so that we can make charcoal out of them in the winter. You can see how much value there is in these rings insofar as you pull the ring aside and the hens go directly to work. They know most of the food in the system is actually cached in these areas where we're sifting out some of the coarser material. We can leave the sprouts upside down or we could reveal them, which is much, much nicer, because then they get to eat these fresh greens. We've talked about sprouting extensively, but really it's as simple as throwing some seed on the top of a compost ring. It's a variation on the theme, but a compost ring in the corner here is quite buried in the beginning of our composting system. 2x4 welded wire, it's buried almost all the way up with sawdust around it. As material comes in that's really coarse, like if we've got coconut shells or avocado rinds, things like that, all of this corn and the wrappers of the corn, we can put it in this first spot and it's directly in contact with the beginning of the composting system. So worms can be safely in here and migrate into the compost when there's fresh food scraps. It protects them and it creates these numerous inoculation points throughout the whole composting system. You can see the idea of the scrap 2x4 welded wire is used extensively all throughout. So in this case, it's being used to hold the sawdust in that we use for a cover material. Here's a spot where it is actively growing some mushrooms. Since there's not mechanical disturbance from the hens inside these spaces, it's where fungal networks and bigger earth little creatures can do their thing. The pill bugs, the millipedes, the centipedes, the worms. Every single spot where these rings are is a little bit of a respite from the chickens' work. So you can see here's one we seeded out to wheat, and we've covered in really coarse sticks and stones. And so this is all habitat space in here. We won't pull this ring. It's a backup nucleus for re-inoculating. So it looks sloppy and kind of crazy, but it's made out of waste material that was free, and each one can be a space for coarse material to simplify the process of getting compost ready to leave, and can re-inoculate the pile later or be a source of sprouts and food for our hens. If we filled our entire system with these rings, we could pull one per day, and that'll probably feed a good group of hens. And that could be our whole system if we wanted it to be. They'll kick this apart, and the biggest, coarsest stuff will fall to the edges first, so we can simply use the hay fork to collect and throw into whatever is the nearest ring. This time of year, we can find on sale some local watermelons. We enjoy them ourselves, but the hens absolutely enjoy them, especially the ones with the seeds. So Sasha will slice one open with a sharp shovel once in a while, and they really, really love it. And then we can use the empty ones to fill with other snacks and soaked grain. Compostable bowl for chicken food. This area up here is where you first come in and where we throw a lot of the weeds and the greens from our farming systems. A lot of coarse material, a little bit rough looking, and this is less of much further away from being a finished compost area for sure, but tons of red wigglers in here, and the coarseness of this compost facilitates them a lot. So we put in, you know, whole bean plants that have been pulled, or sticks from cutting back willow and elderberry, and all of this creates the more structural complexity that makes it harder for the hens to get deep in and get every last worm. But then when we're ready to liberate and feed the hens lots of worms, we can dig through this very, very coarse stuff and get lots of food for them. So that's just one random spot. This picture's throughout the whole system in here. If this was all completely filtered and sifted and uniform and fine, the hens would be able to kick through all of this material and get the worms really easily. So huge benefit to having structural complexity in your composting system. When you're ready to finish, you can have the rings nearby and put this coarse material into it to let it continue to be habitat. But during the active composting process, coarse, long, stringy, woody material throughout is your friend if you're trying to facilitate lots of red wigglers. It's a little harder to turn, but the benefits far outweigh the cons. Extremely simple addition to a composting system. A lot of folks have this material in scraps already anyway. And just a reminder of the value of not necessarily trying to have your compost be absolutely pure, uniform, smooth, fine the whole way through. The big, the coarse, the textural, the stones, the logs, all of that facilitates more food for your chickens. And these little rings placed strategically all throughout as ways to hold material in and simply capture coarse stuff as it's coming through, can be seeded to grain later on and offer tons of sprouts to your hens or habitat for worms. It can all be, it's all a fair bit of labor, but it can all be very simple conceptually and design-wise.
I just like to pile it up. Zelda likes to watch the chickens do their thing. Look at all the worms.
Oh.
It's okay. She puts it in her mouth all the time. Alright, we're out.